Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with a legend, an icon of Santa Barbara local journalism, sports writing, and somebody who's a real role model to a lot of us journalists and somebody who a lot of the athletes over multiple generations really admire. It's my pleasure to be here with John Zant. John, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling good. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, you're such a humble man, but an accomplished man. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you today about your career and your legendary sort of, efforts to tell the stories of Santa Barbara and athletes and the sports community and where it's taken you, outside of Santa Barbara and all over the world. But I want to lead off with this huge honor that you have. You are being inducted into the Hall of Fame. John Zant is a Hall of Famer for the Santa Barbara Athletic Roundtable, and that's coming up real soon. That ceremony, congratulations. That's a huge deal. What does this mean to you, John?
Well, it is an honor. I've been on the selection committee for the Hall of Fame for many years, and I had to recuse myself from the meeting at which I was selected for induction. And, it's a panorama of all the great athletes who've come out of Santa Barbara, many of whom I covered. My first day at the news press, I went to a football practice at Santa Barbara High the day after Labor Day, 1968, and there was a Sam Cunningham, who was a shoe-in Hall of Famer after his career ended, but it was some time later. After Santa Barbara High, of course, he went to UCSC, scored 4 touchdowns in the Rose Bowl in 1973, and then had a 9-year NFL career. He retired as the New England Patriots all-time leading rusher. And he hardly gained any yardage at SC because all he did was block for the tailbacks. So that's one of the many people I've written about. I wrote about Sam many times over the years, stayed in touch with him, and sadly he passed away almost 2 years ago to this date. And that's sort of the downside. Some people get to the Hall of Fame because they're old, and that's part of my gig. So Sam, is gone, and the best basketball player the first year I worked was Doug Little at San Marcos High School. He's in the Roundtable Hall of Fame as well as the University of Oregon Hall of Fame. He was a great basketball player, and he passed away in the last year. And one of my first great stories following a team was Dos Pueblos High's basketball team in 1971. They won the CIF championship. Still a very young school, and that was a huge story. They won the championship in the sports arena in LA, and their star player was Bruce Coldren, and Bruce passed away in the past year. So it's a little bit of a tearjerker for me to be outliving some of these great athletes I covered.
Yeah. So you have spent so many years being on the panel that inducts people into the Hall of Fame, and now you're going into it. And so it's great. It's sort of rewarding the person who did so much to write about all these athletes and put them in the spotlight. And a lot of times sports writers get sort of forgotten about during all of that. But if it weren't for the sports writers, those athletes would not have the platform that they do have. So it's great that you get that recognition. John, let's talk about your career and where you started. You've been a journalist for so many years, and we'll get to the news press and how that ended later. But talk to me about your first job as a sports journalist. How did you get into this industry?
Well, I actually started writing in high school. I actually wrote a weekly report on my high school football team for the La Cañada Valley Sun. I played football, and we won a CIF championship, which I grew up in LA during the 60s when, what a time to be, to follow sports. we had the Dodgers, winning, Koufax and Drysdale winning World Series, and the Rams, and my dad had season tickets for the Rams, and the Lakers came to town, and they were all winners in SC and UCLA. So I came to UCSB very passionate about sports, and I became sports editor of the yearbook my junior year. At some reason, I got into the yearbook, and I was editor in chief of the 1968 UCSB yearbook, and it was dedicated to T.M. Stork. And through my acquaintance with Don Bernstein, sports information director at UCSB at the time, he was a great human relations guy. He was a lifelong friend of mine. He got me an interview with Phil Patton at the News Press, fall of '68, and I got hired and was at work a week later. The first time covering sports on a daily basis instead of the yearbook, a year-long project. Mm-hmm. And I'm just glad it was an afternoon paper at the time, because the first few years I covered high school football and basketball games, I would sometimes try to write the greatest story, would write till 2 or 3 in the morning, and that never would have cut it for a morning paper. Finally, I was able to speed things up when News Press became a morning paper in the 80s. But it was not just sports writing. I mean, we had to, put out a whole sports section every day. We're sort of self-contained. We laid them out, laid the pages out, showed pictures, took phone calls. We were the internet in those days. People wanted to know a score, they called the newspaper. Who won the Cincinnati Reds game? And there was a guy we called the Cincinnati Kid who called us almost every day, wanting to know how the Reds did and what Jack Nicklaus did. And back then, you just picked up the phone and, as politely as possible, why don't you read the paper? But the paper's not going to come out till the next day, and they wanted to know it now. Of course, that is one blessing of the internet for us, that people didn't have to call the newspaper anymore to find those things out. But anyway, it's a complete thing, putting out the paper, going to the composing room, putting the pages together. So, the writing itself was just a small part of, a third of my job or something was writing, and the rest was, working on the desk. And it was great to get out, though, and cover games. That was what I loved the most.
Yeah, the sports writer and the sports desk, there's so much production that goes into putting out that physical paper, especially back in the day. And so you sort of have to be a jack of all trades and be able to know how to do all that. What is it about sports writing that appealed to you? Some sports writers are former athletes, and when the time came when they couldn't be athletes anymore, they found a way to stay in by being sports writers. Other people love writing, they love sports, they're traditional journalists, and they love capturing the drama and human behavior that happens in sports. What attracted you to this profession?
Oh, a passion about sports. Nothing like Friday night football. Bringing a community together. Some of the most exciting games I've covered were championship games, the atmosphere, and it actually became part of my beat at UCSB when I was covering the women's basketball team there. And actually, one of my proudest things was in 1973, I wrote a 4-part series about the rise of women and girls sports. Title IX was really unknown. It had passed in 72, but they didn't connect the dots about that until the late 70s. But there was still a movement afoot at some high schools to start interscholastic sports for girls in a more competitive way. And it all came about. And it also happened in the college level too. And I covered UCSB men's basketball for 6 straight losing seasons. And I turned it over to Mark Patton. I said, when Jerry Pym was hired as coach, I said, Mark, why don't you cover the UCSB men? You know, I've suffered enough. And then Mark has done it for 40 years now. And they've had some great teams, great years. And I was sort of sports editor. I self-appointed myself to start covering a UCSB women's team.
Mm-hmm.
With Coach Mark French, they built an awesome program that, you know, that had great crowds at the Thunderdome, and they made the NCAA tournament 11 times while I was covering them. And, you know, and like one of the most exciting events I've ever been at was when they got to the Sweet 16 at Connecticut in 2004. They lost by 8 points to UConn, which went on to win the national championship by much wider margins. And it was Diana Taurasi's senior year, and she's gone down in history as maybe the greatest women's player ever in the WNBA in her 20th year. And if that game had not been in Connecticut, you know, I think UCSB might have even pulled that one out. You know, that was, you know, the big games are a great highlight. You know, you get, you know, the excitement that everybody has, you also have, you know, and you transmit it through your writing, actually, that if you're passionate about it. And having played sports myself too, you know, this is a great moment in these people's lives. You know, you see an obituary of somebody, and if they played a sport, it often appears in the first part of their obituary. Oh, he was on the Santa Barbara High golf team in the 40s or something, whatever. You know, it's an important part of these people's lives where they actually, you know, they do something that's out there for to enjoy and for other people to enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. That passion really shows with writing and people who have that passion for the topics they're covering. You know, you mentioned something about the Friday nights and the way that sports can bring a community together. Can you talk a little bit about that decision that journalists have to make about whether they want to go cover the Dodgers or cover the Yankees or go cover it on a national level? Because there are many young journalists who sort of see themselves there. But then there's people like you, people like me, who really love local journalism because, well, I'll let you answer that question, but you know, you chose to stay in this community for so many decades. Can you talk about why, why that mattered to you as opposed to going to the LA Times and being a beat writer or something?
Well, it's because I guess it matters to the people here, and I love Santa Barbara. I grew up in the LA area, and once I came to UCSB, I pretty much have lived here I've stayed here ever since. You know, they once a Don, always a Don at Santa Barbara High. Warrior spirit never dies at Carpinteria High School. You know, you get to know the coaches and the people, and I've always felt good about being here. And at the same time, Santa Barbara does have links to following other California teams, particularly in LA. You know, lots of Dodger fans here, Laker fans, of course. With Bill Burtka, we have a long-time link to the Lakers here in Santa Barbara. So I was able to go to LA and cover games. And where I grew up was right near the Rose Bowl, and my dad went to Michigan State and took me to Rose Bowl games when I was a kid. So when the opportunity came up to cover a Rose Bowl game at the News Press, my very first year, I said, I raised my hand, I'd love to go cover the Rose Bowl. And, you know, it makes for a long day, and, you know, I don't celebrate too much on New Year's Eve because you got to drive down to Pasadena. But I ended up covering 27 consecutive Rose Bowl games. The very first one was O.J. Simpson and USC against Ohio State. And I thought it was great to, you know, be able to interview O.J. after the game. And I mean, he was such an icon then. And what transpired later in O.J.'s life makes you realize we don't really know these people all that well. But, you know, we can we can thrill over what they do on the field of play.
Yeah, capturing them in those moments on the field or court or wherever is the magic of it. And what happens off the field, it could be a lot of different things depending on the athlete. John, you and I worked together at the News Press. I was there for 7 years, and you were over there in the sports section, and I was in the newsroom. And we would talk when we were passing, right? Like walking. You're going one way, I'm going the other. We weren't part of the same sort of beat and coverage, but we worked together, and I remember those days pretty well. And obviously you had so much time before I even got there, but take me to the newsroom, like the heyday of what it was like to be a sports writer at the News Press, whatever era that was, and talk to me about, give me some of the names and you and what you were doing and how everything was flowing, because I think that people like us miss that. And then there's this whole generation that will just never know what that was like. So take me there.
Well, the tough thing about it is, way is the hours aren't that conducive, particularly during football and basketball season. The games are at night. And I always said, well, when other people, when the workday ends for most people, and that's when the games start, that's when my work starts. Mm-hmm. So, usually 3, 4 in the afternoon, everybody starts arriving, say, on a typical day where there's 20 basketball games in the county that night. And, we will discuss, what's the big game, what might be the headline story of the day. And we also have to take national news into account, is there a big Laker game tonight? And, we had to have a balance because people did expect us to cover national stuff too, especially if they didn't subscribe to the LA Times or something. We wanted to make it not necessary for them to subscribe to the Times if it was just sports they were interested in. So, we had all the box scores and standings, and someone had to be assigned to put together that page. We call it the agate page, scoreboard page, with all the summaries, the golf scores, all that stuff had to be taken off the wires and somehow put on the page. It was all physical on paper stuff in my first 15 years. I had a typewriter, and I sort of feel fortunate to have been in the business when the old technology was used of linotype machines and hot lead type and and the press rolling in the afternoon and the building shaking and all that business. So that was actually part of the romance of it too in the early days. But later on I think we became better at sports writing and put out a better sports page later years because we had to be more focused. Women's sports came in. When I first worked there, high school, we covered football, basketball, baseball, and track, all boys. And now that was before soccer, before volleyball, before water polo, and then before women and girls sports. So there's a lot more things we had to keep track of to be the paper of record for all these different sports and activities. So we'd all start by editing maybe some feature stories and columns, to go in the next day's paper, and then we'd all go out to cover our games. Basketball season was always a busy time because soccer was also going on and wrestling, and we'd have to have a crew in the office all to take calls from coaches. I mean, we couldn't be physically at every game, so we also had to decide who's going to what game. And so I go to a Santa Barbara basketball game. I come back to the office and have a story to write up, and I also might take another call to write up another story or a little soccer story. And we working with the rest of the paper, I mean, we always consider ourselves an important part of the paper. They sometimes refer to sports as the toy department, because it is fun and games, and it's not life and death, and it's not national policy or anything, but it's it reflects our culture in so many ways, and so many people can relate through sports. Where you're from, and what teams you follow and everything. So we regard it as a very important aspect. And we used to talk how city side, when you guys had elections to cover, a couple times a year maybe, it's a big deal. They'd bring in pizza, and you guys would be trying to cover all the results in, and but we said that's a typical Friday night in the sports department, year round, because we got to throw everything together at the last minute from all these different results and everything. But they didn't provide us with free pizza every time we did that.
Yeah. Oh, well, of course, that newsroom arrogance, it always existed. We're always the most important part of the paper, even though everybody loves sports, so that's definitely part of it. John, one of the challenges I would imagine of covering local news and local sports is that community that you bring together. There's also a downside to that. Parents, I've coached youth sports for 8 years, and parents are the best thing about youth sports and the worst thing, because they get involved in what happens, on the field. And can you talk a little bit about how you balanced coverage of a high school athlete with maybe when parents would get upset or coaches would get upset? Because obviously you're not covering the kids like somebody would be covering the Dodgers, where you're holding them 100% accountable for everything. There's an element of protection involved, but you still got to tell the story. So how did you wiggle through that dance of telling the truth, but also not offending every team or kid who had a bad play in a game?
Yeah. We don't focus on an individual who made a bad play. I would say so-and-so went ahead on an error, and they won't say who made the error, and you got to be sensitive to that, but I was not in favor of covering youth sports before high school, but there was always a lot of pressure to cover AYSO games and youth football games and things.
Little League, yeah.
Before then, it's different. Maybe if this El Segundo Little League team, won the Little League World Series, then the LA Times, had big stories about them. But up to then, there wasn't coverage in the newspaper of Little League games. Yeah, because it should be fun for the kids. They should be enjoying it, because everybody gets all pumped up when they win, but there's also a losing team too in every single contest. So to me, it doesn't become really significant till varsity high school sports. Then you're representing your school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe even in covering JV or freshman games either, because they are still in the learning process, and and then they'll make the varsity, and those teams are representing the school. So we do cover them in a more thorough way, but not with the total glare on errors or whatever in a game, because every game is a game of mistakes.
Yes. How would you deal with a parent who was angry with how you covered something, or a coach who, as coaches love coverage when they win. They don't win, it may not be as important for them to have that coverage. But do you have any memories of moments where you had to navigate out of those situations?
I've wiped it out of my specifics out of my memory. I do remember, testy encounters with people. I remember it wasn't really about high school sports or anything. I had a uneasy conversation with Eddie Matthews, probably the greatest Santa Barbara Hall of Famer, baseball Hall of Famer, and he didn't show up for dedication of Eddie Matthews Field at Santa Barbara High. And the guy who had organized it was really upset about him not showing up, and because lots of people were there hoping to see him. So I wrote a column and I titled it E5, which baseball people might know as the error on the third baseman, which he was in his Hall of Fame career. And later on, I got on the phone with him after that column came out, and he was not happy, but of course, being a professional athlete, he knew that, sports writers were going to call him if they saw them back in, at that level. So,
Yeah.
But, I try to talk to people in an understanding way. It does get on your nerves a little if people say we're favoring one school or the other. We always had that.
Mm-hmm.
I hear people used to get out rulers and measure how long a story was, like for Santa Barbara High versus Dos Pueblos or something. And
Yeah.
well, the Dos Pueblos story was better written, it was more concise. So, you just had to do the best you could. And the great thing about it is it's always a new day. Nothing ruined my day more than opening the paper and seeing a typo or something some mistake I made.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, in newspapers, you always make corrections. If you made a factual mistake, you would correct it in print. And, and if you didn't have a great story, well, if you wrote a great story the next morning, you think, boy, too bad this is going to last just one day, this story ought to be bronzed. But then if you wrote a crummy story, you're glad that the paper's gone to fish wrap, and you move on to the next one.
Yeah, and now with so much of it online, you can just go in there and fix it instantly, if you make a mistake. But I remember those errors, and I had sort of a different view. Was the good stories, I was like, man, they're only going to be here a day. But the mistake, I was like, oh, all day people are going to see that mistake,
That could ruin your day.
So how did you transition from being a sports writer to being a sports columnist? Because being a columnist in sports sounds like a triple dream job, like an amazing thing. So how were you able to do that?
Well, I'd been doing it so long, and I was sports editor for a while, and I really didn't like dealing with the management side of the whole thing. So I sort of gladly passed the torch, and I got to the freedom to do more writing and columns. And having grown up reading Jim Murray, the LA Times, it's humbling to think you're a sports columnist, because he was so fantastic. And but you find yourself every day, if you have a column, you're running it through your mind. If you have an idea, so it's a really thinking process to work out a column. Of course, columns on the spot. I got to write a column while covering the 1988 World Series. I was at Game 1 at the Kelly Coliseum, and rather than write a game story, which the wire services would cover just fine, I was there to write a column. So during the whole game, I'm thinking, what am I going to write about? Jose Canseco hit a grand slam home run, that never, with a line drive off a camera in center field, that was awesome. And then Mickey Hatcher hit a home run for the Dodgers and sprinted around the bases full speed. So I'm, and then, but down to the ninth inning, it's the mighty A's, they're gonna prevail, because the Dodgers were a huge underdog in that series. the word was Kirk Gibson wouldn't be able to play, but then he's in the on deck circle, and he comes up with a man on, Eckersley on the mound, and I thought, well, this is the story right now. And I thought, well, if he strikes out, it's huge drama. It ended with, Gibson striking out, possibly game win. Then he wins the game with the home run, and that story wrote itself. And it was on deadline because it was at night when the game ended, and I remember in a paper in the movie The Paper, that Quaid, that crazy guy, is a reporter.
Yeah.
And he said, it's like butter. It's flowing like butter. He was writing his story out, and that's how I felt that night. It was just like butter, writing about the Gibson home run. And they put that column on the front page of the paper, and it's gone down as maybe the biggest moment in LA sports history. Now, there have been bigger ones probably in the past, but it was more recent, for people to remember.
Yeah.
And quite a dramatic moment. And that's the great thing about being in Santa Barbara, that I'm able to go cover a World Series game while still being a local reporter.
Right. Yeah, no, that 88 World Series was amazing. I remember I was very young, and it's like, wow. And then hearing Vin Scully, the only question now is, could he make it around the bases? And his call is people who watch that game will never forget that game, And so,
yeah. One of the best column ideas I ever had was opening day of the 2010 season. It was Vin Scully's 50th season. I decided I'll just listen to his broadcast. He did a few innings on TV, then he was on radio, and I listened intently to his whole broadcast. And I wrote about the flow of the game through Vin Scully's descriptions. It was the Dodgers against the Diamondbacks. And a week later, I got a letter handwritten from Vin Scully.
wow.
Some woman in Santa Barbara had sent him a copy of my column, and he wrote me a letter saying he appreciated my kind words about his work.
Wow.
That blew me away. That is one of my favorite mementos, is this handwritten letter from Vin Scully thanking me for one of my columns.
That's something that you're kind of done then, right? It's like that's one of the highest honors you can get there.
That topped it. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. So, you were able to cover Dodger games, but I also know you covered the Olympics too, especially it was in 1984 in LA. But can you talk to me about the Olympic game coverage you've done over the years?
Yeah, everybody thinks how that is exciting. I grew up, following Olympics. I ran track. So in fact, I got to know Tommy Smith because he ran in the Easter relays here the year before the Mexico City Olympics, and he came to Santa Barbara when he was coaching the Santa Monica City College team, and he was one of the great athletes and people I've ever known. He did that iconic human rights demonstration at Mexico City, but I didn't cover those. I did, obviously. But the '84 Olympics was big for Santa Barbara, as well as the whole world, actually. Actually, there was a rowing and canoeing was at Lake Casita, so we had an Olympic Village at UCSB. Mark Patton and I both had Olympic credentials to cover the whole thing, and I spent most of my time in LA. And two of the outstanding U.S. athletes are Santa Barbara kids. Karch Karai out of Santa Barbara High on the men's volleyball team, considered by some the greatest volleyball player of all time. And he coached the U.S. women's team to a gold medal in Tokyo. And Terry Schroeder on the men's water polo team, San Marcos High grad. So you have an Olympics with two of the most outstanding athletes, hometown guys. That says a lot about Santa Barbara, and it was our good fortune to be able to not just have any generic coverage of the Olympics. We had great human interest stories with our own people involved.
Yeah.
Then I went to Barcelona, and Terry Schroeder was still on the water polo team. And Athens was my and Sydney and Athens were my last Olympics. And in every case, there was a Santa Barbara person. In Athens, a great beach volleyball match. Eric Fenoy Moana knew how to spell his name from UCSB. Just pulled a huge upset and won the beach volleyball gold medal on the beach at Sydney. And my last Olympics was at Athens when we had Dax Holden on the volleyball team, and Jason Lezak, the UCSB swimmer, was out there, and Brooks Billings was on the indoor volleyball team. So it's always been local people to cover, but also you want to see as much as you can of the Olympics in general, because as I write columns about it. So basically, you're writing 16 straight days, probably about, working 12 hours a day, but you don't ask for overtime or anything because you get to cover the Olympics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's going to segue right into maybe, some of the dark years, so to speak. It used to be great to work the news press. New York Times owned so many opportunities from a geography standpoint where we're located. We have to cover this local community, but we're so close to LA, like you said. And the New York Times and previous owners were supportive of going places to cover things. But then, as we know, things sort of changed, and it all sort of led to that 2006 mass resignation, and then incrementally a downslide to the point where the news press no longer exists. John, you and I were out there in De La Guerra Plaza that first day with the duct tape on our mouths, and you stayed a little longer than me, and participated in demonstrations. Take me back to what led to you leaving the news press, and how does somebody of your stature just sort of go from being sort of this local journalism sports leader to now, you're not there anymore. So talk to me about all that.
Yeah, it was difficult times. And, we talked about sports guys doing their own thing, but we really consider ourselves, we were a total support in comradeship with the whole staff of the paper. I mean, we're all hardworking people. I think no one worked harder than the sports guys, I think, with our long hours and night, but you guys worked equally hard. I mean, obviously. We're all dedicated to putting out a good product. I mean, every day. And that's why we voted in full support when we decided to, join a union. We were together with all the reporters, and so we, when meetings and demonstrations came up, sports guys were there in every case, so during one demonstration in early 2007, that's when. Because of that, I left the paper. I was protesting on the bridge with 7 other colleagues, and we were all fired a couple of days later, I guess. And looking back, it's a moment of pride for me because there were great people out there with me. Rob Kuznia, who was covering education, he got fired along with me, and he won a Pulitzer Prize later on at the South Bay paper, I think.
Lawrence Daily Breeze, yeah.
That was the caliber of people that I was proud to be in their company. I was also consider myself lucky that I was a little older. And, I really felt for younger people in their careers who had this happen to them. because I could almost say, well, I retired from the news press. And then the Independent embraced me shortly thereafter. And so I still got to write a sports column once a week for 15 years. I don't think I hardly ever missed a week writing a column for the Independent. And I also tried to hit on all the highlights of local sports as much as I could during those 15 years, because the news press was getting depleted and not be able to cover sports as much. And then of course Barry Punzel, who worked with me at the news press, he ended up at Newshawk, and so we both got involved in trying to keep the sports coverage going in town. But yeah, it's sad, and to see the whole paper shut down now. It's the sad thing is it could have been still a viable paper, because the community was so engaged, and such a literate community, that I think they'd still be subscribing to a local paper. Advertising is another issue. Made it a struggle for all papers, but I think we would have had a shot if things hadn't unraveled.
Yeah, I mean, all newspapers have been declining because of loss of advertising, but there's something special about Santa Barbara, that they really value their journalism, and that's why we still have local outlets. We have Newshawk, we have the Independent, and people really thirst for that important coverage. It was just to think about, at one time we had so many superstars under one roof for working for one publication, and we were doing such great work in the community, and then that sort of gone. You talked about your columns, and you continue to write for another 15 years. As we know, it's hard to come up with stories sometimes, right? Games write themselves, but it's those features, it's those columns where you try to capture the human interest. How did you pick your stories? I'm sure a million people said, "Hey, John, write about this, write about this, write about this." You can't write about everything, but what was the thing that said that's a story, or that's a column?
Well, when issues came up, like I might have wrote a few columns about, like, concussions, for instance, and Jack Youngblood came to Santa Barbara to speak about it. It did seem like there's always something going on that in the world of sports that I could glom onto. Of course, one of the greatest assignments picked me back in 1988. I would write sometimes about personal experiences that weren't necessarily strictly sports, but in '88, I climbed Mount Whitney with some friends in May, and we went up over snow. So I wrote a column about that. Outdoors. It fit in, and David McCumber, the editor at the time, said, "Wouldn't it be great if we had a story about the whole Santa Barbara County coastline? Have someone walk along the whole coastline." And because of my Mount Whitney column, I think they said, "Well, Zant could do that," because it was physically demanding too. Some of the areas, like in the North County around the Guadalupe Dunes and Muscle Rock, you had to scramble over some pretty rugged country. And so that series, it was a 10-part series in 1988. Some people know me more for that than for my sports writing. Every day I would rock part of that coast, and then I'd write a story about it, and it would appear in the next day's paper. And so it was 110 miles, 10 days, and I got to walk on Vandenberg Air Force Base property, which is not open to the public, and through Hollister Ranch. I was able to walk on that. He timed it for the low tides. And every day I'd sit down and write a story about it, and it became quite a sensation at the time. I know the last segment was going from Carpenter State Beach to Rincon Creek, which is the county line, and the paper invited people to come out and join me. So a couple hundred people show up, and I'm leading them down the beach, and below the railroad tracks there's sort of a wall, and the tide was sort of iffy that day, and a wave came in. I went out right up to the rocks, and I hesitated. Then a wave went out, and I went charging through, and then all these people came charging after me, and it was like the Red Sea. I was no Moses though, because the next wave came in and got several of them pretty soaked. That was the end of my coast walk, but that was probably the greatest assignment I've ever had and the most fun. Otherwise, it's trying to stay on top of what's topical. Just many things. I actually have been trying to get my columns together and maybe do a rewrite of some of my career in terms of what I covered. But a lot of it in 50 years, including my independent columns. Of course, now Victor Bradley has picked up the independent as far as their sports coverage goes. So I'm just sort of being a little more of a retired guy right now. It sort of ended. My last weekly column probably ended about the time the pandemic came, when sports basically shut down, and for quite a time there wasn't anything to write about.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, Victor Bryant at the Independent, yeah, as well. So I wanted to ask you, I recently interviewed Marilyn McMahon, the late Marilyn McMahon, and I was talking to her for a story about the news press debt and the creditors. And before she passed away, we had this conversation, and I was going to do a feature story on her, and it didn't work out, obviously. But she told me that she had every one of her articles, about 5,000 of her articles, neatly organized in her garage. And I was like, wow, I want to go there. I want to look at all of these, because, I have thousands of my articles too in my garage, but they're not neatly organized. They're there, but it's a day's work to go through them. Where's your stuff, John?
Actually, I could go grab a folder behind me right now if you wanted to give me a minute.
Sure. Yeah. I want to see what you have.
No, actually, right below me here. I'll let this happen. Okay, I got 1999 columns.
Wow, this is amazing.
Jim Ginner, a beach volleyball player, had a heart attack at the beach, and his friends gathered around him, and he pulled through. A guy named John Whittemore was almost 100 years old, and he was still competing in track. The Laker camp was here, and Will Chamberlain's death, I wrote a column about that. That hit me hard because he was such a strong athlete. Then Notre Dame 25 SC 24, I wrote about that game. Aaron Busher at UCSB. Robert Sands, a City College football player, wrote a book called Gut Check about his experience as a junior college football player. I did a column on him. Oh, I wrote my column about Vin Scully begins 50th season. I guess that was the year.
So you've got everything. You kept it all.
Yeah, Sam Battistone put together the all-time NBA team. The Lakers post-mortem, NBA Finals, Lakers, Spurs, Lance Armstrong getting local connection, working out here for Tour de France.
Uh-huh.
Tommy Smith, Fits of Freedom, documentary came out about Mexico City. I wrote that. Peyton Jordan, a great track coach, retired here. I've interviewed him. I wrote a feature on Randall Cunningham, who was NFL All-Pro in those days. Jack Triguero, great Santa Barbara High coach, got into the local Hall of Fame. Guy named Dave Chappell, who used to play football for UCSB, did a sculpture of Florence Griffith that was put outside a hospital in Irvine where he lived. So I wrote a column about that. So Sparky Anderson, he started his career here with the Santa Barbara minor league baseball team. I wrote about him. Actually, and I wrote a story about the whole century at the end of 1999. I picked out 100 sports figures from Santa Barbara in the past century.
Wow. Uh-huh.
And I remember one of them was Ernest Lewis Thayer, might have been the earliest. He retired. He lived in Montecito for the last 25 years of his life, and he wrote the original Casey at the Bat poem. He wrote it for a San Francisco paper.
Oh, okay.
On the turn of the century. And so I included him in the sports figures of the century in Santa Barbara.
Now, do you ever pull the stuff out and read it over a cup of coffee, or is it just kind of there forever?
Yeah, I've been actually. I sometimes I want to look something up. Something comes up I remember. Well, like Jack Triguero, he passed away. I might have tried to look up what I'd written about. Another sorry thing about the news press is they don't have an online database, as far as I know, that we can access.
Yeah.
So a lot of my stuff, the only copy of my stuff is some things that I clipped out.
Yeah.
And a lot of things, I don't have much that I clipped out the first 10 years or so. And I got more industrious. Once I started writing columns, I clipped every one of them out.
Right.
It's always exciting to see my byline. I have my last lead type byline before the paper went photographic as far as imaging goes.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
It's John Zant, news press sports writer. 2 lines and 2 pieces of lead. It's a paperweight.
Oh my goodness. Hey, John, I want to wrap up in a second, but I want to ask you, as a journalist, about your family. I know Kathleen a little bit from covering her and various volunteer and activism things she's done in the community, but can you talk to me about your family and your kids and how you were able to balance such a successful career and family at the same time? Because as we know, journalism requires so much time. It's more than an 8-hour-a-day job.
Yeah, well, that is maybe a factor in the fact that Kathleen and I just had our 26th wedding anniversary. We're a blended family. She has 2 daughters. I have 4 kids. And when my first marriage ended, and my kids, the oldest was in high school and ended up moving with my ex-wife to Eugene, Oregon. So that actually worked out for me in a way that I covered a lot of track meets up in Oregon. The Olympic trials was always there, and I would go up to Oregon, half a dozen times a year at least to visit the kids, and they would come down here during the breaks and summer breaks, spring breaks. And one of my proudest moments was going up there. All my kids played sports, but they weren't they played it for all the right reasons. And my two daughters actually were in the relay in the Oregon State track championships for high school, and they in the 4x110 relay they handed off. So I got a picture of them doing the handoff, but all my kids have done well, and college graduates, and they're all just thriving, and I think their experiences growing up here and then later on, getting good educations and sports experience was part of their lives, but they don't follow sports like I did as a kid, with a passion as far as following teams and things. But right now we have two grandchildren in Santa Barbara, and so now I'm watching youth sports. Grandson just started his first flag football just last week, and granddaughter here in town is playing first grade AYSO soccer.
Oh, it's this weekend. Yeah, it's starting up.
On the games now, and I was saying, nope, I'm not going to write these up. I'm just going to just have fun, kids. and we'll probably end up going to the Santa Barbara High School San Marcos game tonight. This is a big game day here in Santa Barbara when this is being recorded. So this is going to be a fun day. But Kathleen has always been a good sports fan. We sort of knew each other at UCSB. We overlapped a little bit. I graduated before she did, but she had a lot of friends on the football team there who I was good friends with, and we were also mutual friends of Don Bernstein, the sports information guy, who once he worked for ABC in New York, we visited him all the time. So that's been a big connection for Kathleen and me. We've gotten along very well because of our interests and lives together. So, but it is demanding. There are nights when many nights when I'm working covering games, and not home for the family dinner every night. But you got to adjust and make the most of it.
Yeah, to make breakfast count in those days.
Yeah.
Well, John, it's such a pleasure to hear you talk about your career, and this is just a snapshot. There's no way to actually respect and honor everything you've done, because it's so much, the little things, the medium things, the big things, and you're exactly what a local journalism hero is, because you've sacrificed, you've done so much of your life, your passion, your time, because you believe in the importance of providing coverage to a community. And that is, that's the heartbeat of a local community, and you've done it for so long. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on the show, and you're soon to be a Hall of Famer, right where you belong. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time.
It was fun doing this, and also working with you in the past, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, have a good day. Take care.